She was a billionaire Sheikha, bound by duty. He was a poor poet, rich only in dreams. In secret, they married, believing love was enough, until betrayal tore them apart. Years later, he returned. No longer a starving artist, but a ruthless tycoon. Would love reunite them, or destroy them forever? The desert wind whispered through the grand palace of Almazar, carrying with it the scent of distant jasmine and the echo of forgotten dreams. Within the towering marble walls, beneath chandeliers that sparkled like a sky full of stars, Sheikha Layla bint Rashid stood by her bedroom's arched window, gazing out at the endless golden dunes. The world beyond the palace walls seemed so vast, so free, yet she remained trapped within the confines of royal duty. Her life was a portrait of luxury, silken gowns embroidered with gold, jewels that glimmered under the warm Arabian sun, servants who bowed at her every command. But none of it mattered, because her heart had found its longing in a world far removed from the grandeur of royalty. It had found him, Amir, a poet with nothing to his name but his words and the fire in his soul. Her fingers traced the cool stone of the window, and she closed her eyes, recalling the first time she had seen him, the night that changed everything. A chance encounter in the souk months ago, on a night stolen from duty. Layla had done what no royal woman was supposed to do. She had disguised herself in a simple black abaya and escaped into the bustling streets of the souk, her face hidden beneath the soft fabric of her veil. The marketplace was alive with energy. The scent of saffron and cinnamon filled the air, merchants called out their wares, and the sound of oud music wove its way through the narrow alleyways. It was in that chaos that she had heard him, a voice rich and deep, laced with poetry. She had followed the sound like a woman bewitched. In the dim glow of lanterns, a young man stood atop an old wooden crate, his presence commanding yet unassuming. He wore a simple white tobe, the sleeves slightly frayed, but his posture was one of quiet defiance. His dark, coal-lined eyes burned with an intensity that made the crowd hush as he spoke. Love is not measured in gold, nor chained by titles. It is the moon's silent promise to the tides, a whisper that lingers even in the absence of sound. Layla felt her breath catch. The world around her faded, leaving only his voice, only him. She wasn't the only one captivated. People tossed coins at his feet, but he did not stoop to collect them. He simply smiled, bowed his head in thanks, and stepped down. Layla had never seen a man like him. He was not like the nobleman in her father's court, polished and empty of passion. There was something raw about him, something untamed. She had not meant to approach him, but fate had other plans. As she turned to leave, her bracelet, a delicate gold piece set with a single emerald, slipped from her wrist and landed at his feet. Amir picked it up, his fingers brushing over the cool metal before his gaze lifted to hers. For a moment neither spoke. Then he smirked, twirling the bracelet between his fingers. A treasure lost in the marketplace, he mused. It does not belong here. Layla hesitated. Speaking to a commoner, especially a man, was unthinkable for a Sheikha. But there was something in his voice, something that made her heart beat in a way she had never known before. Neither do I, she found herself whispering. His smirk softened, his eyes searching hers, as if he saw straight through her disguise. Then perhaps, my lady, we are both lost. That night, under the golden glow of the lanterns, something ignited between them, something neither of them could fight. A love in secret. What began as stolen glances in the souk soon turned into whispered words beneath the moon. Layla risked everything to see him again. She found ways to slip away from the palace, meeting him in the ruins beyond the oasis, where no one would dare look for a Sheikha. There, under the vast Arabian sky, Amir recited poetry only for her. His words wrapped around her like a lover's embrace, painting dreams of a world where love was not bound by bloodlines or duty. You are the sun, Layla, he told her one night, his fingers barely grazing hers, and I, a man who has only known the night. But even in darkness, I am drawn to you. Her breath trembled. Then why do you hold back? Amir exhaled a shaky laugh. Because you are untouchable. Layla stepped closer, her heart pounding. Then break the rules, Amir, and he did. His lips met hers with the tenderness of a poet, and the hunger of a man who had spent his life longing for something he thought he could never have. It was a kiss of stolen time, of rebellion, of promises unspoken. When they pulled apart, he pressed his forehead against hers, his voice barely a whisper. I will love you even when the stars no longer burn in the sky. She knew then that she would never love another, a secret marriage, but love was not enough. They both knew their love was forbidden, that if her father Sheikh Rashid ever discovered the truth, it would mean ruin, perhaps even death for Amir. And yet she could not let him go. So on a night when the moon shone brighter than ever, Layla and Amir made a choice that would change their fates forever. In the heart of the desert, beneath the crumbling pillars of an ancient temple, they stood before an old Bedouin priest. There were no grand celebrations, no witnesses, only the soft rustling of the wind and the flickering glow of a single lantern. With the sky as our witness, Amir vowed, slipping a simple silver ring onto her finger, I take you as mine, for this life, and every life that follows. Tears slipped down Layla's cheeks as she whispered, and I, you. When his lips met hers this time, it was no longer stolen, it was theirs. Their love, their vow, their secret. For one blissful moment, Layla believed they had defied fate. But fate was not so easily challenged, for outside the temple, hidden in the shadows, a pair of cold, watchful eyes had seen everything, and their happiness was about to be torn apart. The palace of Almazar, once a place of silent luxury, now trembled with the fury of a storm. Sheikha Layla sat frozen in her chamber, her fingers digging into the silk of her gown, as her father's voice thundered through the halls. You dare disgrace our bloodline. You a Sheikha, marry a street poet. The air was thick with rage, the scent of burning incense, unable to mask the suffocating weight of betrayal. Layla's heart pounded violently in her chest, as she forced herself to meet her father's piercing gaze. I love him, she whispered, her voice shaking yet unwavering. The moment the words left her lips, Sheikh Rashid's hand slammed against the heavy oak table, sending a goblet of pomegranate wine spilling onto the marble floor. The crimson liquid spread like blood, an omen of what was to come. Love, he spat, love is for fools. You were born for power, Layla, for a dynasty, and you throw it away for a man who owns nothing but his words. Layla clenched her fists, holding back tears. Amir is worth more than any prince or sultan you force upon me. He loves me not for my wealth, but for my soul. Her father laughed, but there was no humor in it, only a cold, dangerous edge. Your soul, he leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. Then let us see if he loves your soul when his body hangs from the gallows. Layla's blood ran cold. No, father, please, she cried, falling to her knees. Punish me if you must, but spare him, banish him if you will, but do not take his life. But Sheikh Rashid had already turned to the guards. Find him, and when you do, kill him. A desperate escape, Amir ran. The night had turned against him, the once familiar streets now filled with shadows that hunted him. Layla's warning had come too late. The moment he heard the pounding of horse hooves, he knew his fate was sealed. He had no title, no family name to protect him. He was nothing but a poet, a man who dared to love a woman meant for kings. His lungs burned as he darted through the alleyways, his mind racing. The city gates were too far, the soak too exposed. If he was caught, there would be no trial, no mercy, only death. A blade sliced through the air. Amir barely turned in time, the steel grazing his arm. Pain seared through him, but he kept running. Find him, a voice roared behind him. They were closing in. Then in the distance, Hope, a ship anchored at the docks, its sails billowing under the moonlight. With the last of his strength, Amir sprinted toward it, his feet barely touching the ground. The moment he reached the wooden planks, a hand grabbed his shoulder, yanking him back. Thought you could escape. The guard sneered, raising his sword. Amir saw death in his eyes. But then a shot rang out. The guard collapsed, a dark stain spreading across his robes. Amir turned, chest heaving. A hooded man stood a few feet away, lowering his pistol. He did not speak, only gave a single nod toward the ship. Amir did not waste another second. He leaped onto the deck, just as the sails unfurled, the salty wind whipping against his wounded skin. As the ship drifted into the endless sea, Amir collapsed onto the wooden planks, his vision darkening. Layla's face was the last thing he saw before the world faded to black. Layla's imprisonment back in the palace. Layla screamed as the heavy iron doors of her chamber slammed shut. "Let me out!" She pounded her fists against the wood, her sobs racking her body. Her father's voice echoed through the halls, cold and final. "You will never leave this room again, Layla. You are dead to me." She fell to her knees, clutching her stomach, gasping for air. She had lost everything, Amir, her freedom, her very soul. She curled into herself, her heart shattering into pieces. But as the days turned to weeks, something changed within her. Beneath the sorrow, a flame began to burn. She had lost Amir once, but if he was still out there, still breathing, she would find him. No matter the cost. Fate begins again. Years passed, and in the distant lands across the sea, where men became kings through blood and steel, Amir was no longer the man he once was. The poor poet had died the night he fled Almazar. In his place, a ruthless tycoon was born, and he was coming back, for revenge, for power, and for the woman he could never forget. The grand city of Almazar had changed in the years since Amir had fled, but its golden domes and towering minarets still stood against the endless desert, untouched by time. The palace loomed above all, its marble walls, a fortress of secrets and broken dreams, and within those walls, Sheikha Layla still lived, though she was no longer the woman she once had been. Dressed in a flowing white gown, embroidered with gold, she stood on the palace balcony, gazing out at the city that was both her home and her prison. Her hair, once always adorned with pearls and rubies, now flowed freely down her back. Her eyes, once filled with the reckless joy of love, now held only sorrow and longing. It had been years since that fateful night, years since she had last seen Amir. Had he survived? Did he still think of her, or had she been nothing but a forgotten memory, lost in the sands of time? A soft breeze caressed her skin, but the warmth of the desert night did nothing to ease the coldness in her heart. She had spent years hoping, but hope was a cruel thing, and then, one evening, hope returned in the form of a storm. The arrival of the phantom tycoon Almazar buzzed with whispers. A powerful foreign tycoon had arrived, his wealth rumored to rival that of kings. He was said to have built an empire from the ashes of nothing, ruling over vast lands, shipping routes, and oil-rich territories. Ruthless, cold, and mysterious, he was a man no one dared cross. His name, Zayn al-Faris. But Layla did not know that name. Not yet. It was the night of a grand royal gathering, a masquerade ball, hosted in honor of a potential political alliance. Layla, as always, was expected to attend, to smile, to be the perfect Sheikha. The great hall of the palace was filled with noblemen and royals, adorned in silks and diamonds, their faces hidden behind elegant masks. Music echoed through the halls, as dancers spun beneath the golden chandeliers. The air smelled of jasmine, oud, and deception. Layla stood at the edge of the room, feeling like a ghost among the living, and then, she felt it. A presence, a gaze so intense it sent a shiver down her spine. She turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Across the hall, near the grand marble staircase, stood a man unlike any she had ever seen, tall, commanding. Dressed in an exquisitely tailored black suit with gold embroidery, he carried himself with an air of effortless power. A black mask covered the upper half of his face, but his eyes, sharp, dark, piercing, held an intensity that made the entire room fade away. Something about him felt familiar, as if her soul recognized his before her mind did. Before she could look away, he moved, straight toward her. The first dance, Layla's breath hitched as the masked stranger extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said, his voice deep and rich, like the midnight sea. She hesitated. Every instinct warned her that this man was dangerous. but there was something in his presence that called to her, something irresistible, something that made her forget how to breathe. Slowly she placed her hand in his. His grip was strong, firm, but when his fingers wrapped around hers, a strange warmth spread through her chest, an unexplainable familiarity. The music swelled, and he pulled her into the dance. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony, his hand resting possessively at the small of her back, guiding her effortlessly across the floor. His scent, smoky, with hints of spice, and something distinctly masculine, wrapped around her, making her light-headed. "You dance beautifully, Sheikha," he murmured, his lips dangerously close to her ear. Layla swallowed hard. "And you are quite bold, sir." His lips curled into the faintest smirk. "A man who has spent his life conquering cannot afford to be anything else." "And what is it you conquer?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He spun her, then pulled her back against his chest, his grip tightening. "Kingdoms." Her heart pounded. "And hearts?" she asked, barely aware of her own words. A slow, dangerous smile played on his lips. "Once a long time ago." Layla felt her pulse quicken. Something in his tone, something in the way he held her, sent a shiver down her spine. And then the music stopped. The moment shattered. Layla stepped back, suddenly aware of how closely they had been pressed together. "Who are you?" she asked, breathless. The man tilted his head, studying her. Then without a word, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Layla stared after him, her heart racing, confusion and longing warring within her. Why did he feel so familiar? Why did his touch feel like something she had known before? And why did his gaze feel like home? The revelation, the answer came the next day. Layla sat in the royal garden, the scent of orange blossoms filling the air, when a servant arrived with a message. "Sheikha Layla, the honored guest, Zayn al-Faris, has requested a private meeting." Her breath caught. Zayn al-Faris. The name echoed in her mind. She had never heard it before, yet it felt like a ghost from her past. She hesitated, and then before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I will see him." Moments later, she stood in one of the palace's private chambers, the silk curtains swaying with the desert breeze. Then the doors opened, and he entered. But this time, he was unmasked. Layla's world tilted. Her breath stopped, because standing before her, with the same sharp eyes, the same devastating presence, was the man she had loved, the man she had lost. "Amir," she choked, her voice barely above a whisper. But the man before her did not flinch. His expression remained unreadable, his eyes colder than she had ever seen them. "I was Amir once," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth she had known. "That man is dead." Layla's heart clenched. "No, you're lying." She took a step forward, her hands trembling. "You're still him." But he took a step back. "You think I returned for love?" His lips curled into something bitter. "No, Sheikha, I have returned for vengeance." The words struck her like a dagger to the chest. Tears welled in her eyes. Vengeance, against whom? His gaze darkened. "Against the people who took everything from me." Layla shook her head. "Amir, please." "I am not Amir," he snapped, his voice sharp as steel. "That poet died in the desert. Now I am Zayn al-Faris, and I have come to take back what was stolen from me." Layla's breath hitched. "And what was stolen?" she asked, afraid of the answer. His eyes locked onto hers, burning with an emotion too complex to name. "You." The moment those words left his lips, silence thickened between them, heavy as a desert storm. "You." Layla's heart pounded, the weight of his declaration pressing against her chest. He had come back for her, but not for love, for revenge. She took a step forward, her fingers trembling, as they reached for him. "Amir, if I was stolen from you, then why do you look at me, as if I am your enemy?" His jaw clenched, his sharp cheekbones, accentuated by the flickering candlelight. He caught her wrist before she could touch him, his grip firm yet careful, as if he was holding something fragile, something dangerous. "Don't call me that name." His voice was low, edged with something dark. That name belonged to a man who was weak, a man who believed love could protect him from the cruelty of this world. "I am not that man anymore." Layla's throat tightened. Then why are you here? His grip on her wrist loosened, his fingers grazing her skin before he finally let go. He turned away, exhaling sharply, as if trying to regain control. Because fate is cruel, Layla, he murmured. And I have unfinished business in Almazar. Layla stared at him, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The boy she had loved had been kind, filled with dreams and poetry. This man, this tycoon, was ruthless, powerful, and unriddable. But beneath the cold armor he had built around himself, she could see it: pain, longing, a war raging between love and vengeance. She stepped closer. Tell me the truth, Zane. Is it only revenge that brought you back? A flicker of something unriddable crossed his gaze. Then in an instant, it was gone. I do not owe you an explanation. His tone was sharp, cutting away whatever fragile thread had tied them together in that moment. He turned to leave, his long coat sweeping behind him. But before he could walk away, Layla's voice stopped him. What if I say I never stopped waiting for you? He froze. Layla's breath trembled as she continued, stepping closer. What if I tell you I never stopped loving you? Slowly he turned to face her again, and for the first time, his cold mask cracked. A forbidden moment. The silence between them stretched unbearably. Then he moved. With startling intensity, Zane closed the distance between them, in 2 swift steps, his hands cupping her face, his touch burning against her skin. Layla gasped, her heart racing wildly. You have no idea what you do to me, he murmured, his voice a mixture of torment and desire. Layla's eyes searched his, her hands pressing against his chest. She could feel the rapid beat of his heart, proof that, despite his woes, he was still a man. Then don't fight it, she whispered. His thumb brushed over her lower lip, and something in him shattered. With a groan of surrender, he crashed his lips against hers. The kiss was fire and desperation, a battle between love and control. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her tightly against him, as if he was afraid she would disappear if he let go. Layla melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, her heart aching with every second of lost time. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but reality was so much more intense, so much more consuming. When he finally broke away, his forehead rested against hers, his breath uneven. This is madness, he whispered. Layla smiled softly, her fingers tracing the edge of his jaw. Then let us be mad together. But the softness in his gaze vanished. It's not that simple, Layla. His voice was hoarse, laced with something darker. There are things you don't know, things that will change everything. Layla frowned, her fingers tightening around his coat. Then tell me. His silence was the only answer she received. Amir's dark truth days passed, and though the city of Almazar continued, with its celebrations, Layla felt the storm brewing beneath the surface. Zayn Mia was everywhere. He moved through the royal court, with the confidence of a king, his presence commanding attention, his name whispered in every corner. The rulers of Almazar saw him as an opportunity, a powerful foreigner, whose wealth could strengthen their alliances. But Layla saw beyond the facade. Late one evening, she found him alone in the palace gardens, gazing at the moonlit fountain. You're hiding something from me. He turned his head slightly, acknowledging her presence, but saying nothing. Layla stepped closer. If you want revenge, then tell me why. What did they do to you? For a moment he said nothing. Then in a voice colder than the night breeze, he said, they destroyed me. Layla, your father ordered my execution. I was hunted like an animal. I nearly died in the desert, abandoned, left to rot. He turned to her fully, his eyes burning with a fury that made her shiver. Do you know what it's like to starve? To beg, to fight for every breath, while the people who ruined your life feast in golden palaces? Layla's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. His jaw clenched. But you benefited from it. You stayed in this palace. You dined with those who wanted me dead. Layla flinched. I had no choice. They locked me away, Amir. I was a prisoner in my own home. Something in his gaze flickered. But he did not reach for her. He did not comfort her. Instead he turned away.
It doesn't change anything. I will get my revenge. I will make them pay. Layla stepped in front of him, placing her hands on his chest. And what about us? His hands curled into fists. There is no us, Layla. She shook her head, her tears spilling over. You don't mean that. He let out a bitter laugh. Don't I? You think love will save us from the destruction I am about to unleash? I cannot afford to be that weak boy who loved you. Layla reached up, cupping his face. Then don't be that boy. Be the man who still loves me. For a moment she thought she had reached him. For a moment his lips parted, as if he was about to say something, something real, something true. But then his walls slammed back into place. Love is not enough. His voice was cold again. He stepped back, breaking her touch. You need to stay out of my way, Layla, because when I'm finished, there will be nothing left of the people who hurt me. And with that he walked away, leaving Layla standing in the moonlight, her heart breaking all over again. The days that followed were restless, heavy with an unspoken storm. The palace of Almazar gleamed under the golden sun, but within its marble walls, shadows lurked, shadows of past sins, and looming retribution. Zayn once, Amir, her Hamir, had become a force of destruction, a tycoon whose power reached beyond borders. He moved like a phantom in the court, his every word a calculated move, in a game only he knew the rules to. And Layla, she was drowning in helplessness. She had lost him once, she would not lose him again. But how do you fight for a love that is buried beneath years of pain and hatred?
A storm at the royal banquet. The grand hall shimmered with light, chandeliers casting a golden glow over the nobles and foreign dignitaries gathered for the royal banquet. It was a night of celebration, a welcoming feast for the powerful billionaire who had returned from the ashes. Layla watched from across the room, her heart constricting as she saw him. Dressed in a tailored black suit, Zayn exuded control, his sharp features unreadable. He stood beside the Crown Prince of Almazar, engaged in quiet conversation, his aura of authority making even the royals tread carefully. But she knew the truth. This was not a man here for alliances. This was a man here to destroy. The moment his gaze met hers, the air between them tightened. A flicker of something, recognition, longing, hesitation, passed through his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by the same cold mask he had worn since his return. Layla refused to be ignored. Summoning every ounce of courage, she crossed the hall, ignoring the murmurs of nobles as she approached him. A word, my lord. Her voice was steady, though her heart was anything but. The crown prince arched a brow, but stepped aside with a smirk. It seems the Sheikha still holds old affections. Zayn's jaw tensed, his gaze burning into hers. Fine, 5 minutes. He turned sharply and strode toward the terrace. Layla followed, her pulse racing. The night air was cool, scented with jasmine. As soon as they were alone, she spun to face him. What are you doing? She demanded. This isn't just about power, is it? You're planning something dangerous. He let out a slow, mocking breath. And if I am? Her chest tightened. Then I will stop you. His lips curled into a dark smirk. You think you can? I know I can. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with emotion. Because the man I loved, the man who once wrote poetry about the moonlight on my skin, he would never hurt innocent people. That man still exists inside you, Amir. At the mention of his old name, his control cracked. In one swift motion, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her against him, their bodies flush. Don't call me that, he warned, his voice a mix of pain and desire. Layla's breath hitched. Then make me stop. His grip tightened, his eyes fierce and burning, searched hers, and then without warning, his lips crashed onto hers. It wasn't a kiss of tenderness. It was a war, a battle of love and anger, of longing and defiance. His hands tangled in her hair, his body pressing her against the stone railing as if he could mold her into him. She clung to him, her fingers fisting his shirt, desperate to hold on to the man she had lost. For a moment there was no palace, no vengeance, no past. There was only them, But then, as quickly as it began, he pulled away. Breathless, he stepped back, his hands shaking. "This changes nothing," he rasped. "You cannot save me, Layla." She reached for him, her heart breaking. "You don't need saving, you just need to remember who you are." His eyes darkened. "I remember everything, and that's exactly why I won't stop." Before she could speak, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Sane turned away, his expression closing off. Layla watched him go, knowing the war was far from over, but she would not give up on him. Because beneath the ruthless tycoon, her Amir was still there, and she would fight for him, no matter what it took. The night of the royal banquet had left Layla shaken. Sane's kiss still burned on her lips, but his words haunted her more. "This changes nothing." She had seen the war in his eyes, the way his soul fought between vengeance and the love they once shared. But no matter how much she reached for him, he kept slipping through her fingers like sand in the desert wind. Layla refused to accept it. She would not lose him again. The unfolding storm in the days that followed, rumors spread through the palace like wildfire. Sane was moving swiftly, cutting secret deals, securing alliances with powerful enemies of the royal family. Layla knew time was running out. Late one evening, she found herself wandering the palace corridors, searching for him. She had to know the truth, to hear from his own lips what he intended to do. She finally found him in the grand library, standing by a towering bookshelf, his back to her. "I knew you'd come," he said, without even turning. Layla's heart clenched. "Then you know why I'm here," he sighed, finally turning to face her. In the dim candlelight, his face was unreadable, but his eyes, they held a storm she couldn't ignore. "You should stop this, Layla," he murmured. "Walk away before you get hurt." She stepped closer. "I won't, because I know you, Amir, and I know this isn't who you truly are." His jaw tensed. "You keep calling me that, but that boy is dead." Layla shook her head. "Then why did you kiss me?" Silence. She could see the way his breath hitched, the way his fingers curled into fists. "Was that part of your revenge too?" she pressed, her voice trembling. Sane let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can fix me with a kiss, Layla?" His eyes locked onto hers, dark with emotions he refused to name. "You think love will erase years of suffering. I think love is the only thing keeping you from losing yourself completely." His expression hardened. "Love did not save me when I was left to die in the desert. Love did not protect me when I was cast aside like I was nothing. Love is weakness, Layla, and I have no use for it." Her heart shattered at his words, but she refused to believe them. "Then why are you still here?" she whispered. For a moment his mask slipped. For a moment she saw the truth. He was afraid. Afraid that if he let himself love her again, he would lose control. That the pain of the past would consume him if he dared to feel. "Let me go, Layla," he said, softer this time. She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing against his. "I will never let you go." He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. Then before she could say another word, he turned and left. And this time, he did not look back. The breaking point that night, Layla could not sleep. A terrible feeling twisted in her stomach, a premonition of something dark. She was right. By morning the palace was in chaos. Sane had made his move. The royal family's most powerful trade routes had been seized overnight by anonymous investors linked to him. Key allies of the kingdom had withdrawn their support, crippling the economy. And worst of all, whispers of a political coup had begun spreading through the corridors. Layla's father, the ruling sheikh, was furious. "That man is a traitor," he roared. "We should have killed him when we had the chance." Layla felt sick. Sane had truly gone too far. She had to stop him. A desperate plea that evening. Layla found him again, this time at the old ruins on the edge of the city, the place where they had first confessed their love years ago. He stood by the broken fountain, lost in thought. "You knew I would come," she said softly. "I did," he admitted, without turning. She swallowed hard, stepping closer. "You've done what you came here to do. You've hurt them. You've made them pay. But is it enough, Sane? Or will you keep destroying everything, even yourself?" He let out a slow breath.
You don't understand, Layla. I have no choice. Yes, you do. She reached for him, and this time he didn't pull away. Tell me the truth, she pleaded. Do you still love me? A long silence, then finally his voice broke. I never stopped. Tears filled her eyes. Then don't do this. Don't let revenge take you away from me again. His fingers brushed against her cheek, a feather-light touch. I don't know how to stop, he whispered. Then let me show you. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his, a silent promise, a desperate plea, and this time, he kissed her back, not with anger, not with war, but with surrender. A choice must be made. The night stretched between them, filled with whispered words and broken promises. But when the morning came, Layla knew, Sane would have to choose, vengeance or love, destruction or redemption. Would he let go of the past and fight for their future, or would he lose himself in the war he had started? As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, Layla held her breath, because by sunset, everything would change. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the desert city of Almazar. Yet within its palace walls, an unseen storm raged, one more dangerous than any sandstorm that had ever swept through its lands. Layla stood on the palace balcony, her heart pounding, as she gazed into the distance. She had done everything she could. She had pleaded, fought, and even surrendered her heart once more. But would it be enough? Would Sane choose her, or his vengeance? The meeting of fates that evening, as dusk settled over the city, Layla received a message, a single note, delivered in secrecy. Come to the old ruins, tonight alone. She knew who it was from. Her hands trembled as she held the note, her mind torn between hope and fear. Sane was finally ready to talk, but was he ready to let go of his war? With her heart in her throat, she left the palace under the cover of darkness, slipping past the guards, and making her way toward the ruins, where they had once dreamed of a future together, where love had begun, and where it might end. A confrontation in the ruins. When she arrived, he was already there, standing beneath the crumbling archways. His silhouette was bathed in moonlight. Dressed in a black robe embroidered with gold, he looked like a king, a ruler of shadows and secrets. Yet beneath all his power, all his ruthlessness, Layla still saw the man she had loved. You came, he murmured, his voice low, unreadable. I will always come for you, she whispered. He exhaled sharply, turning away. You should have stayed at the palace. This is not your fight. Layla stepped closer. It is my fight, because you are my fight, Sane. His shoulders tensed. I have already started the final phase. There is no stopping it now. Then tell me, after everything is done, after you've taken your revenge. What then? Her voice trembled. Will you finally find peace, or will you still be haunted by the ghosts of the past? Silence. A long, painful silence. Then at last he turned to her. His face was torn, caught between the ruthless billionaire, the world feared, and the poet who had once written sonnets beneath the stars. What would you have me do, Layla? He asked, his voice raw. Forget everything. Forgive the people who betrayed me. Walk away as if none of it ever happened. She swallowed back her tears. I am not asking you to forget. I am asking you to choose something more powerful than revenge. And what is that? He asked, bitterly. She reached up, cupping his face with trembling hands. Me. Sane inhaled sharply. His hands came up, gripping her wrists, as if they were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. Layla, his voice broke. I love you, she whispered. And I know you still love me, but love and revenge cannot exist together. One will always destroy the other. And if you choose revenge, you will destroy yourself. Tears shone in his dark eyes. She had struck the one part of him that still felt. The war inside him raged violently, pulling him in two directions. And then, without warning, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was not a kiss of anger, nor of desperation. It was the kiss of a man who was falling apart, who had fought too long, who had been drowning for years, and had finally found something, someone to hold on to. Layla melted against him, pouring every ounce of love she had into the kiss, into him. Come back to me, Amir, she whispered, against his lips. His breath hitched, and then finally he whispered back, I never left, the last sacrifice. When they pulled away, Layla saw something change in his eyes. A decision, a surrender, not to vengeance, but to love. Tell me how to fix this, he said. Tell me how to undo the destruction I have started. Layla took his hand. Come with me. We'll face this together. For the first time in years, Sane let someone else lead him. The battle before the dawn. But love alone was not enough. By the time they returned to the palace, it was too late. His enemies, his allies, had already made their move. The kingdom was on the verge of war. If Sane turned against them now, he would not only lose his power, he would be hunted. Layla stood beside him in the royal court. As accusations flew, threats were made, and her father the sheikh glared down at Sane with nothing but hatred. You have betrayed this land, the sheikh roared. Why should we not have you executed? Sane did not flinch. Because I am still the only one who can stop what is coming. The room fell silent. Sane took a step forward, his voice filled with authority. Call off the executions, halt the war, let me undo what I have done. And in return I will give up everything, my wealth, my empire, my name. Layla gasped, turning to him. He glanced at her, a soft smile touching his lips. I choose love over revenge. Her heart shattered, full of love and pain at the same time. I will not let you do this alone, she whispered. But Sane only shook his head. You already saved me, Layla. Now let me save you. A new beginning. The days that followed were full of chaos. Sane did what he had promised. He dismantled his empire, cut off his allies, and exposed the corruption that had fueled his revenge. By the time it was over, he was no longer the ruthless tycoon the world feared. He was simply Sane, and when it was finally done, when the war had been stopped before it could begin, he returned to Layla. She found him in the gardens of the palace, standing beneath the olive trees, watching the sunset. She walked up behind him, her heart in her throat. What now? She asked softly. He turned, his eyes full of something she had not seen in years. Peace, now, he smiled. Now, we start over. And as she stepped into his arms, she knew they had won. Not through power, not through revenge, but through love. The war had ended before it could begin. The storm of vengeance had passed, leaving behind not ruin, but the possibility of a new dawn. But love was never just about grand sacrifices. It was about what came after. What did a ruthless tycoon do when he was no longer ruthless? What did a sheikha do when her heart had chosen a man the world had told her to forget? This was not just an ending. This was the beginning of something deeper, something more powerful, a love that had defied time. A new dawn in the desert. The first rays of morning sunlight stretched across the golden dunes, painting the palace gardens in hues of fire and gold. Layla sat on the white marble bench, beneath an ancient olive tree, her silk robes billowing softly in the desert breeze. Her fingers traced the delicate petals of a jasmine flower, the same flower Sane had once tucked behind her ear when they were young and foolish, dreaming of a world where love was enough. That world had been shattered. But now, as she heard footsteps approach, she realized maybe they could build a new one. She turned, her heart stuttering at the sight of him. Sane stood before her, no longer the ruthless tycoon, who had returned with vengeance burning in his chest. He was something else now, something softer, yet stronger. His sharp suits had been replaced with a simple white thorb, his dark hair tousled by the wind, his usually guarded eyes, holding only one thing. Her. Layla rose slowly, breathless. You stayed. A small wry smile tugged at his lips. You asked me to. She swallowed hard, the emotions too much, too raw. You gave up everything. No, he corrected gently, stepping closer. I gave up my revenge, but I never gave up you. Her breath hitched as he reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth spiraling through her. I thought you might leave, she confessed. Once the war was over, once you had nothing left to fight against. He exhaled, his fingers tightening around hers. Layla, I have been fighting my whole life. For the first time, I don't want to fight anymore. I just want to live. with you. She felt her heart shatter and mend all at once. And if my father still refuses to accept you, she whispered. A shadow passed over Zayn's face, but it didn't shake him. Then I will wait. However long it takes, I will prove to him that I am worthy of you. Her lips trembled. You were always worthy. And then, as if pulled by an invisible force, she stepped into his arms. Their foreheads touched, the world disappearing around them. I love you, she breathed. His hand rose to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheek with infinite tenderness. And I will love you, he murmured, for as long as I have breath. A forbidden kiss, under the stars. That night, they met in the palace courtyard, away from the prying eyes of the world. Layla wore a deep crimson gown, embroidered with gold, her hair cascading in dark waves, the scent of jasmine clinging to her skin. Zayn stood waiting for her, his heart pounding in his chest. If we are caught, she whispered as she reached him. Then let the world see, he interrupted, pulling her closer. I will not hide my love for you. A soft gasp escaped her, as his fingers trailed down her spine, igniting something deep within her. Zayn, he silenced her with a kiss. It was slow, reverent, a kiss that spoke of years lost, of longing that had never faded, a kiss that promised forever. Layla melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, as she deepened the kiss, pouring every emotion she had into him. This was not the desperate kiss of stolen moments. This was a kiss of certainty, a kiss that defied time, fate, and every obstacle in their path. And when they finally pulled away, breathless, he whispered against her lips, "Marry me, Layla, this time, not in secret. Marry me as my queen." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. The Sheikh's final test. But fate was not finished with them yet. When Layla's father, the great Sheikh, heard of their engagement, he summoned Zayn to his court. "You dare ask for my daughter's hand?" The Sheikh thundered, his dark eyes burning with fury. Zayn stood tall, unwavering. "I do. You are a man who once sought revenge against this family. How can I trust you now?" Zayn met his gaze head-on. "Because I have already proven my love. I walked away from the empire I built, from the power I once held. I have nothing left but my name, my heart, and my devotion to Layla, and I offer them to you, without hesitation." The Sheikh studied him for a long moment. Then unexpectedly, he rose and walked past Zayn, straight to his daughter. "You love him?" he asked Layla. Her voice was unwavering. "With every piece of my soul." The Sheikh turned back to Zayn. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, he extended his hand. "Then prove to me that you are not just a man of words." Zayn took his hand without hesitation. "I will spend my life proving it." A slow, approving nod. "Then you have my blessing." A wedding beneath the desert moon. Days later, the desert was alive with celebration. Torches lined the palace courtyard, their flames flickering in the night breeze. The scent of roses and jasmine filled the air, music and laughter ringing through the halls. Layla stood in front of a great mirror, dressed in a gown of art. She barely recognized herself. "You look like a queen," her handmaiden whispered. Layla turned, her heart pounding. Not just any queen. She took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over her. His queen. Outside, beneath the desert sky, Zayn went. His eyes softened the moment he saw her. She stepped toward him, and the world faded away. As they exchanged vows beneath the endless stars, surrounded by the people who had once tried to keep them apart, Layla realized something. They had been tested by time, by pain, by betrayal and loss. And yet love had won, not in grand gestures, not in power or sacrifice, but in the quiet moments, the whispered promises, the choice to fight for something greater than vengeance, each other. And as Zayn leaned in for their first kiss, as husband and wife, she knew this was not just the end of their story, it was only the beginning. The desert wind whispered through the palace gardens, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. The golden sands stretched endlessly under the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Layla stood on the balcony, her long silk dress billowing in the breeze. She placed her hands on the railing, looking down at the courtyard, where laughter echoed. A little boy, no older than 4, ran across the marble steps, his dark curls bouncing as he chased after his sister. The girl, slightly older, giggled as she dodged his grasp, her white dress fluttering around her. "Mama," the boy called, his emerald eyes, so much like his father's, lighting up when he saw her. Layla smiled, her heart overflowing with love. "Ian, be careful," she called back, laughing as the boy nearly tripped over his robes. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, a familiar warmth pressing against her. "They have your spirit," Sane murmured into her hair, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. She leaned into him, her fingers covering his on the railing. "And your heart," he chuckled, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you remember the first time we stood here together?" She closed her eyes, memories washing over her, the stolen moments, the whispered promises, the pain of separation, and the overwhelming joy of the reunion. "Yes," she whispered. "Back then, I never believed we'd make it here." "And now?" he asked, turning her in his arms. She gazed into his eyes, seeing not the ruthless tycoon, not the broken poet, but the man she had always loved. "Now I believe in us more than anything." He smiled, pressing a lingering kiss to her lips. "So do I." Below them their children continued to play, their laughter a melody carried by the wind, a reminder that love had not only survived but flourished. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sane pulled Layla closer, holding her as if he would never let go. Because this time, he never would.